In the heart of Manhattan's financial district, where power suits and million-dollar deals define success, nobody pays attention to the invisible army of night shift workers who keep the corporate world gleaming. But sometimes, a single moment of human connection can shatter every barrier that money and status have built. What you're about to witness will challenge everything you think you know about worth, dignity, and the extraordinary power hidden in ordinary people. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The 42nd floor of Harrison Financial Tower buzzed with the familiar energy of late-night corporate warfare. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a breathtaking view of the city that never sleeps, but inside the glass walls, a different kind of sleeplessness plagued the building's most successful occupant. Omar Hassan adjusted his Italian silk tie for the third time in an hour, a nervous habit that had developed over the past 18 months. At 36, he commanded respect in boardrooms across 3 continents, his investment firm managing over $2 billion in assets. His sharp jawline, piercing dark eyes, and impeccably tailored suits made him a fixture in Manhattan's elite social circles. Yet behind the polished exterior, Omar carried a weight that no amount of success could lift. The corner office that served as his sanctuary was a testament to his achievements. Awards lined mahogany shelves, photographs captured handshakes with world leaders, and his Harvard MBA hung prominently behind an imposing desk. But tonight, like so many nights before, Omar found himself staring at his reflection in the darkened windows, seeing not a successful executive, but a man slowly drowning in his own isolation. The transformation hadn't happened overnight. 2 years ago, Omar had been different. Warmer, more trusting, genuinely excited about building relationships both personal and professional. Then came the betrayal that changed everything. Rebecca Matthews, the woman he'd planned to marry, had systematically embezzled nearly $3 million from his personal accounts while planning their wedding. The discovery had shattered more than his heart. It had destroyed his ability to trust anyone's motives. Since then, Omar had built walls that no one could scale. He'd fired 3 assistants for minor infractions that previously wouldn't have bothered him. Business partnerships were scrutinized to exhaustion. Social invitations went unanswered. Even his own family back in Lebanon had grown distant, frustrated by his coldness during their last visit to New York. The irony wasn't lost on him. The more successful he became, the lonelier he felt. His latest acquisition, a struggling tech startup with revolutionary blockchain technology, should have been cause for celebration. Instead, Omar found himself working 16-hour days, not because the business demanded it, but because his empty penthouse apartment felt like a mausoleum. His phone buzzed with yet another invitation to a charity gala. These events had become professional obligations rather than social pleasures. Omar attended them with the efficiency of a surgeon, making the necessary appearances, writing the expected checks, and leaving as soon as proprietary permission allowed. The women who approached him at these gatherings fell into predictable categories: socialites seeking status, entrepreneurs hunting investors, or gold diggers drawn to his Forbes listing. He'd developed an almost supernatural ability to identify their angles within the first 60 seconds of conversation. The loneliness had begun manifesting in physical ways. Omar's sleep patterns had deteriorated, dark circles becoming permanent fixtures beneath his eyes, despite expensive concealer. His appetite had diminished, and his personal trainer had expressed concern about his rapid weight loss. Most troubling was the growing numbness he felt toward everything that once brought him joy. Art, music, travel. Nothing seemed to penetrate the emotional armor he'd constructed. His mother's voice echoed from their last phone conversation 3 weeks prior. "Ya Habibi," she'd said, using the Arabic endearment that once made him smile. Success without love is just expensive loneliness. Her words had stung because they carried the weight of absolute truth. Omar's business philosophy had always centered on calculated risks and careful analysis. Every investment underwent months of scrutiny. Every partnership was dissected for potential vulnerabilities. But applying this same methodology to human relationships had left him with quarterly reports instead of genuine connections. He'd become expert at reading profit margins, but had forgotten how to read people's hearts. The cleaning crew usually arrived after midnight, but Omar had grown accustomed to their quiet presence. They moved through the building like shadows, maintaining the pristine environment that his high-paying clients expected. He'd never paid particular attention to the individual workers. They were simply part of the building's infrastructure, as unremarkable as the security cameras or climate control systems. Tonight felt different, though he couldn't articulate why. Perhaps it was the weight of the decision he'd been avoiding for months. His business partner, James Morrison, had been pressuring him to expand their operations internationally. The opportunity was solid, the potential returns enormous, but it would require Omar to travel extensively, to build relationships with foreign investors, to once again open himself to the possibility of betrayal. The internal conflict was tearing him apart. His analytical mind recognized the business opportunity, but his wounded heart recoiled from the human element required for success. How could he convince international partners to trust him with their money when he couldn't trust anyone with his emotions? Omar loosened his tie and rolled up his sleeves, preparing for another sleepless night of financial projections and market analysis. The reports spread across his desk told stories of growth and opportunity, but they couldn't fill the growing void in his chest. He'd built an empire, but lost himself in the process. Outside his office, the cleaning crew had begun their nightly routine. The soft hum of vacuum cleaners and the gentle clink of cleaning supplies created an oddly comforting soundtrack to his solitary work. These sounds had become as familiar as his own heartbeat, a reminder that life continued its quiet rhythms even in the sterile world of high finance. What Omar couldn't have known was that tonight, among the invisible army of night workers, was someone whose presence would challenge every assumption he'd made about worth, dignity, and the true meaning of success. Someone whose accidental entrance into his carefully controlled world would force him to confront the man he'd become, and remember the man he'd once dreamed of being. The stage was set for an encounter that would prove sometimes the most profound changes come from the most unexpected places, and that wisdom often wears work clothes instead of designer suits. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. 3 floors below Omar's corner office, Grace Washington pushed her cleaning cart through the marble corridors of Harrison Financial Tower with practiced efficiency. At 52, she had perfected the art of invisibility that her profession required. Security guards nodded without really seeing her. Late-working executives stepped around her without acknowledgement, and surveillance cameras recorded her presence without anyone reviewing the footage. Grace had been cleaning corporate buildings in Manhattan for nearly 15 years, ever since she'd arrived from Ghana with nothing but determination and a 7th-grade education. What she lacked in formal schooling, she'd made up for in street wisdom and an uncanny ability to read people. In her native Twi language, there was a saying her grandmother used to repeat, "The eyes that clean also see the truth." Grace had discovered the profound accuracy of those words during her years of moving unseen through the lives of America's powerful elite. Tonight's shift at Harrison Financial had begun like any other. Grace's team of 6 cleaners had divided the building into sections, each responsible for multiple floors. She'd drawn floors 38 through 42, the executive levels where the real money was made and lost. These floors required extra attention, Hand-polished conference tables, streak-free windows, and meticulous vacuuming of Persian rugs that cost more than most people's annual salaries. But Grace approached her work with more than professional duty. She genuinely cared about creating environments where people could thrive. Her philosophy was simple: clean spaces promoted clear thinking, and clear thinking led to better decisions. In her own way, she believed she was contributing to the success of every person who walked through these gleaming halls. What set Grace apart from her colleagues wasn't just her work ethic. It was her gift for languages and her insatiable curiosity about the world beyond her circumstances. During her lunch breaks, she studied English grammar books, borrowed from the public library. She taught herself basic Spanish to communicate with building maintenance crews, picked up bits of Mandarin from Chinese restaurant workers in her neighborhood, and had even learned some Arabic phrases from taxi drivers during her commute. Grace's apartment in Queens was a testament to her intellectual hunger. Stacks of books lined makeshift shelves, newspapers in 3 languages covered her kitchen table, and a worn laptop, a gift from her daughter who'd graduated college the previous year, displayed educational YouTube videos when she wasn't working her 2 jobs. Her daughter Patricia often marveled at her mother's ability to absorb knowledge despite never having formal opportunities for education. "Mama," Patricia would say, "you know more about the world than half my professors, and you learned it, all from cleaning office buildings." Grace's response was always the same: "Baby, every place teaches you something if you pay attention. Rich people's problems aren't so different from poor people's problems. They just have better furniture while they worry." This wisdom had been earned through years of observation. Grace had cleaned during corporate mergers and witnessed grown men cry into their coffee cups. She'd emptied trash cans filled with discarded resignation letters and found personal notes, revealing affairs, financial troubles, and family crises. The wealthy executives who barely acknowledged her existence during the day left evidence of their humanity scattered across their desks each night. Tonight, however, something felt different. Grace had developed an intuition about buildings. They had moods, rhythms, almost like living entities. Harrison Financial Tower felt tense, charged with an energy that made her uneasy. Perhaps it was the unusual number of executives still, working past midnight, or maybe it was the hushed conversations she'd overheard near the elevator banks. Whatever the cause, Grace found herself moving more cautiously than usual. She'd already completed floors 38 through 41 when she reached the 42nd floor, the executive level, where the most important decisions were made. The elevator doors opened to reveal a corridor lined with portraits of the firm's founding partners, men whose stern faces seemed to judge everyone who passed beneath their painted gazes. Grace consulted her assignment sheet. Tonight's tasks included Omar Hassan's corner office, conference room 4201, and the executive break room. She'd cleaned Mr. Hassan's office dozens of times over the past 2 years, but had never encountered him personally. His space always told stories of a man consumed by work, coffee cups forgotten until they grew cold, documents spread across every available surface, and windows that showed fingerprint smudges where someone stood staring out at the city for extended periods. Unlike other executives who left personal touches in their workspace, family photos, vacation souvenirs, children's artwork, Omar Hassan's office was sterile, almost monastic in its lack of personal items. The only exception was a small framed photograph tucked behind his computer monitor, positioned so that only he could see it while working. Grace had glimpsed it once during her cleaning routine, a young man and woman standing before the Lebanese flag, their faces radiant with happiness. She'd assumed it was Mr. Hassan with a sister or perhaps a former girlfriend, but the image had been carefully angled away from casual observation. As Grace approached the executive corridor, she noticed an unusual amount of activity. Conference room 4201's lights were on, and she could hear muffled voices through the heavy wooden doors. According to her schedule, the room should have been empty. Executive meetings typically concluded by 6 p.m., and it was now well past midnight. Grace hesitated, checking her watch and then her assignment sheet. The cleaning crew was specifically instructed to avoid occupied spaces, but her schedule clearly indicated that conference room 4201 should be cleaned tonight. She'd been working these floors long enough to know that missing scheduled tasks could result in complaints, and complaints could cost her the job that supported not only herself, but also helped pay for her daughter's graduate school expenses. The voices behind the conference room door were growing more animated. Grace pressed her ear closer and heard what sounded like an argument, not the polite disagreements of boardroom negotiations, but something more personal and heated. Her grandmother's voice echoed in her memory. When people argue with passion, truth lives nearby. Grace made a decision that would alter the trajectory of multiple lives. Instead of returning to the elevator and postponing the cleaning until the following night, she decided to wait. She positioned her cart near the conference room and began dusting the corridor's artwork, staying close enough to complete her assigned tasks once the meeting concluded. What she couldn't have known was that inside conference room 42201, Omar Hassan was engaged in the most important conversation of his professional life, a heated discussion with potential international partners that would determine not only his company's future, but also force him to confront everything he'd become since Rebecca's betrayal. The catalyst moment was approaching, though neither Grace nor Omar realized that their worlds were about to collide in a way that would challenge every assumption they'd made about success, worth, and the invisible barriers that separate people who share the same spaces but live in completely different worlds. Inside conference room 4201, the tension had reached a breaking point. Omar Hassan sat at the head of a polished oak table, his usually composed demeanor cracking under the pressure of the most crucial negotiation of his career. Across from him sat three men who represented a consortium of Middle Eastern investors, men whose combined wealth could transform his firm from a successful regional player into a global financial powerhouse. Rashid Al Mahmoud, the lead negotiator, from Qatar, leaned back in his leather chair with the confidence of someone who held all the cards. His silver beard was meticulously groomed, his traditional white thobe contrasting sharply with the modern Manhattan skyline visible through the conference room's floor-to-ceiling windows. "Mr. Hassan," Rashid said, his English accented but precise, "your financial projections are impressive, but numbers alone do not build trust. In our culture, business is personal. We invest in men, not just companies." Omar's jaw tightened. This was exactly what he'd feared, the human element that his defensive walls had been built to avoid. "With respect, Mr. Al-Mahmoud, my track record speaks for itself. Our fund has delivered consistent returns of 18% annually for the past 5 years. Yes, interrupted Khalil Nasser, the second investor, a Lebanese businessman whose family had built telecommunications empires across 3 continents. But what do we know of your character, your values? In Beirut, they speak of Omar Hassan as a brilliant but cold man. Is this the partner we want for ventures that will span decades?" The third man, Faisal al-Rashid from Dubai, had remained silent throughout most of the evening's discussions. Now he spoke, his voice carrying the weight of final judgment. "We have heard troubling stories, Mr. Hassan. Former employees who describe you as ruthless. Business partners who feel you trust no one. How can we enter into partnership with someone who views every relationship as a potential betrayal?" Omar felt the familiar walls of his isolation closing in. These men weren't just questioning his business acumen. They were dissecting his soul and finding it wanting. The irony was bitter. His success had been built on the very traits they now criticized, yet those same traits threatened to prevent him from achieving his ultimate goals. "Gentlemen," Omar began, struggling to find words that wouldn't sound defensive. "Business requires careful evaluation of risks. I've learned to—" "You've learned to be afraid," Rashid interrupted, his tone not unkind but painfully direct. "Fear makes for cautious investors but poor partners." The room fell silent, except for the barely audible hum of the building's ventilation system. Omar stared at his hands, manicured fingers that had signed deals worth hundreds of millions but had forgotten how to reach out in friendship or trust. Outside the conference room, Grace had finished dusting the corridor's artwork and was growing concerned about the time. Her shift supervisor, Miguel Santos, was strict about completing assigned tasks on schedule. The voices from the conference room had grown quieter, but she could still detect the underlying tension in their muffled tones. Grace glanced at her assignment sheet once more. Conference room 4201 was clearly marked for tonight's cleaning, and she'd already reorganized her schedule to accommodate the delay. Her daughter Patricia was expecting a call at 2 a.m. They spoke every night when Grace's shift ended, and Patricia finished her graduate school studies at Columbia. Missing that call would worry her daughter, who already felt guilty about her mother working 2 jobs to support her education. Making a decision born of necessity rather than boldness, Grace approached the conference room door. She knocked gently, 3 soft raps that she hoped would be polite but audible. The conversation inside stopped abruptly. "Come in," Omar called out, assuming it was building security or perhaps his assistant with urgent documents. Grace turned the handle and stepped into the room, her cleaning cart rolling softly behind her. The sight that greeted her was unlike anything she'd encountered in 15 years of cleaning corporate offices. 4 men in expensive suits sat around a table, laden with documents, their faces reflecting a mixture of surprise, annoyance, and curiosity at her unexpected arrival. "I'm so sorry to disturb you," Grace said, her voice carrying the slight lilt of her Ghanaian accent. "I'm Grace from the cleaning crew. My schedule shows this room for tonight, but I can come back if you're not finished." Omar's first instinct was irritation. His carefully orchestrated meeting had been interrupted by a cleaning lady who clearly couldn't read the situation. But as he looked at Grace, really looked at her, something unexpected happened. Her presence seemed to shift the room's energy, replacing tension with something softer, more human. Rashid Al-Mahmoud smiled, the first genuine smile he'd displayed all evening. "Please, sister, don't apologize. We are the ones occupying your workplace." Grace was surprised by the warmth in the older man's voice, and the fact that he'd addressed her as sister, a term of respect she rarely heard in corporate environments. "Thank you, sir. I can wait outside until you finish your meeting." "Nonsense," Khalil interjected, rising from his chair. "We have been talking business for hours. Perhaps we need perspective from someone who understands the value of honest work." Omar watched this exchange with growing amazement. These men, investors whose approval he desperately needed, were treating a cleaning lady with more warmth and respect than they'd shown him all evening. The contrast was both humbling and enlightening. Faisal gestured toward an empty chair. "Please, sit with us for a moment. In Dubai, we believe that wisdom comes from unexpected places." Grace hesitated, glancing at Omar, who seemed as surprised as she was by this turn of events. Her practical nature warred with curiosity. She had work to complete, but these men seemed genuinely interested in her presence. "I don't want to intrude on your business," Grace said diplomatically. "You're not intruding," Rashid assured her. "You're reminding us of something we'd forgotten in our hours of financial discussions, that all business ultimately serves people. Tell us, what do you think makes a good leader?" Grace found herself in a surreal situation. An hour ago she'd been invisible, moving through the building like a ghost. Now she sat at a conference table with four men whose combined wealth could buy small countries, and they were asking for her opinion on leadership. Looking directly at Omar, she said, "A good leader sees people, really sees them, not just what they can do for you, but who they are. My mama used to say, if you can't see the person cleaning your floor, how can you see the person signing your contract?" The silence that followed was profound. Omar felt something crack inside his chest, not breaking, but opening. This woman, whose name he hadn't known despite her cleaning his office for 2 years, had just articulated a truth that his Harvard MBA and years of experience had somehow missed. Rashid nodded approvingly. "Your mother was wise, and what do you see when you look at Mr. Hassan?" Grace studied Omar carefully, her cleaning experience having taught her to read spaces and the people who occupied them. "I see a man who's forgotten how to trust," she said, quietly. "But I also see someone who keeps a hidden photograph on his desk, which tells me he hasn't forgotten how to love. Sometimes the strongest walls are built by the most tender hearts." The room fell silent once again, but this time the silence felt different. Not tense, but contemplative. Omar stared at this remarkable woman who had just seen through years of carefully constructed defenses in the span of minutes. For the first time in months, he felt something other than emptiness in his chest. The accidental encounter had begun, but none of them could have predicted where it would lead. The unexpected invitation to join the business discussion left Grace in uncharted territory. In her 15 years of cleaning Manhattan's corporate towers, she'd never been asked to sit at a conference table, let alone offer opinions to men whose decisions shaped global markets. Yet something about Rashid Al-Mahmoud's genuine warmth and the other investors' curious expressions made her feel cautiously welcome. Omar watched this surreal scene unfold with a mixture of fascination and discomfort. His carefully orchestrated meeting had been transformed by the presence of someone he'd never truly noticed, despite her maintaining his workspace for 2 years. The irony wasn't lost on him. These investors, whose respect he desperately sought, were showing more interest in Grace's perspective than they had in his financial projections. "Tell us about your work here," Khalil Nassar said, leaning forward, with genuine curiosity. "What do you observe about the people in this building?" Grace considered the question carefully, aware that her words carried unexpected weight in this room. "People are people, no matter how much money they make," she began, her Ghanaian accent lending a musical quality to her observations. "I've seen executives cry over family problems and celebrate their children's first steps. I've found thank you notes written to janitors and witnessed grown men comfort colleagues during divorces. Money changes what people can buy, but it doesn't change what they need." Faisal al-Rashid nodded thoughtfully. "And what do they need?" "Same thing everyone needs," Grace replied without hesitation. "To be seen, to be valued, to know their work matters. I clean the same offices every night, and I can tell you which people are happy and which are just successful. There's a difference." Omar felt an uncomfortable recognition in her words. When was the last time he'd felt truly happy rather than merely accomplished? When has success become a substitute for satisfaction? Rashid addressed Omar directly. "Mr. Hassan, in 2 years of this woman cleaning your office, have you ever had a conversation with her?" The question hung in the air like an accusation. Omar's face flushed with embarrassment. "I work late hours. Our schedules rarely overlap." "But they overlap tonight," Khalil observed, "and yet you seem surprised by her wisdom. What does this tell us about your awareness of the people who support your success?" Grace sensed Omar's discomfort and intervened diplomatically. "Mr. Hassan works very hard. I see the long hours, the dedication. Sometimes when people are carrying heavy burdens, they don't have energy to notice what's around them. Her defense of him surprised Omar. This woman had every reason to point out his neglect, yet she chose understanding over criticism. It was a generosity he hadn't experienced in his professional life for years. "You speak Arabic," Faisal said, to Grace, switching to his native language. "Where did you learn?" Grace smiled, responding in halting but respectful Arabic. "I learn from taxi drivers, from restaurant workers in my neighborhood. Language is a bridge to understanding." The three investors exchanged meaningful glances. Here was someone who, despite economic disadvantages, had taken initiative to learn their language and culture, something Omar, despite his Lebanese heritage and business aspirations, had never attempted with his employees or service providers. "Grace," Rashid said, returning to English, "what would you do if you were responsible for bringing people together in business?" Grace thought for a moment, her eyes moving around the room before settling on Omar. "I would start by remembering that every person in the building, from the security guard to the CEO, has a story worth knowing. You can't lead people you don't understand, and you can't understand people you don't see." "And how would you build trust?" Khalil pressed. "Trust is like cleaning," Grace said with a slight smile. "You build it slowly, one small action at a time. You show up consistently, you do what you promise, and you treat people's spaces, their work, their dreams, their struggles with respect. Trust can't be bought or forced. It has to be earned through daily choices." Omar found himself leaning forward, genuinely interested in her perspective. "But what about when trust has been broken? When people have proven they can't be relied upon?" Grace's expression softened as she looked at him. "Mr. Hassan, I've cleaned offices after corporate scandals, after partnerships dissolved, after friendships ended in lawsuits. I've seen what broken trust does to people. But I've also seen something else. The people who rebuild are usually stronger than they were before, if they're willing to learn from the experience instead of just protecting themselves from it." "Explain," Omar said, his voice barely above a whisper. "When trust is broken, you have two choices," Grace continued. "You can build walls so high that nothing bad can reach you, but nothing good can reach you either. Or you can build wisdom. Learn to recognize trustworthy people, set appropriate boundaries, but still remain open to connection. Walls make you safe, but alone. Wisdom makes you careful, but not closed." The silence that followed was profound. Rashid, Khalil, and Faisal exchanged looks that spoke volumes. In 15 minutes, this cleaning lady had articulated principles of leadership and relationship building that they'd spent hours trying to extract from Omar's carefully prepared presentations. "Grace," Rashid said finally, "you understand something that many successful businessmen never learn. How did you acquire such insight?" Grace's laugh was warm and genuine. "When you're invisible to most people, you become a good observer. I've watched thousands of interactions over the years. I've seen what works and what doesn't. Plus, my grandmother raised me with stories and proverbs that taught lessons about human nature. She used to say, 'The person who only looks up never sees where they're walking. The person who only looks down never sees where they're going.'" Omar realized that Grace had spent years studying human behavior in ways that his business school professors never taught. Her education came from experience, observation, and genuine care for understanding people, qualities that his formal training had somehow overlooked. "What do you see when you look at this room right now?" Faisal asked. Grace surveyed the four men carefully. "I see successful people who are trying to solve a puzzle. 3 of you want to invest in someone you can trust for the long term. 1 of you wants to prove he's trustworthy, but doesn't know how because he's forgotten how to trust himself. The solution isn't in the financial reports. It's in whether Mr. Hassan can remember why he started this business in the first place." Before his heart got hurt, Omar felt exposed, as if Grace had read his personal diary aloud. Yet instead of feeling violated, he felt understood. For the first time in 2 years, someone had seen past his defensive mechanisms to the wounded. But hopeful person underneath, Khalil stood up slowly, his decision evident in his posture. "Mr. Hassan, we came here tonight planning to make a business decision based on profit projections and market analysis. Instead, we've discovered something more valuable. A reminder of what real leadership looks like." He gestured toward Grace. "This woman has demonstrated more wisdom about building relationships and earning trust in 20 minutes than we've seen in months of business meetings. If you can learn from her example, if you can remember how to see people the way she sees them, then we have a foundation for partnership." Omar looked at Grace with new eyes, seeing not just a cleaning lady, but a teacher whose lessons he desperately needed to learn. The first discoveries had been made, but they were just the beginning of a transformation that would challenge everything. Omar thought he knew about success, leadership, and the value of every person who crossed his path. The atmosphere in conference room 4201 had transformed completely. What began as a tense business negotiation had evolved into something unprecedented, a genuine exchange of ideas between people from vastly different worlds. Rashid Al Mahmoud glanced at his gold Rolex, noting it was nearly 1:30 a.m., yet none of the men showed signs of wanting to end this extraordinary encounter. "Grace," Rashid said, his tone respectful but probing, "you've shown us wisdom about leadership and trust, but business involves difficult decisions, sometimes choosing between profit and principles. How do you navigate such challenges in your own work?" Grace considered the question carefully, aware that her answer might reveal more about her character than she'd initially planned to share. "Just last month I faced exactly that choice," she began. "The cleaning company I work for got a contract with a law firm downtown. Good pay, steady hours. But on my third night there, I discovered they were keeping files about people trying to get asylum. Refugees like some folks in my neighborhood. The lawyers were sharing private information with people who wanted to hurt these families." Omar leaned forward, genuinely intrigued. "What did you do?" "I could have minded my own business," Grace continued. "Kept quiet, kept the job, kept getting paid. But I couldn't clean those offices knowing I was helping people who were hurting others. So I quit, even though I needed the money for my daughter's school expenses." Khalil Nassar whistled softly. "That must have been a difficult decision financially." Grace nodded. "Patricia, that's my daughter. She wanted to quit graduate school when she found out what happened. Said she didn't want her education built on my sacrifices, but I told her the same thing my grandmother told me. When you compromise your values for money, you're not buying anything, you're selling yourself." Faisal al-Rashid exchanged a meaningful glance with his partners. They'd spent years evaluating potential business associates, looking for indicators of character and integrity. Yet this cleaning lady had just demonstrated the kind of moral courage they rarely encountered in boardrooms filled with suits and degrees. "How did you replace the income?" Omar asked, surprised by his own concern for her practical situation. "I took on weekend shifts at a hospital in Brooklyn," Grace replied. "Harder work, longer commutes, but I sleep better at night. My mama didn't raise me to look the other way when people are being hurt, no matter what it costs me." Rashid stood and walked to the windows overlooking Manhattan's glittering skyline. "Omar, in our culture we have a concept called amana. It means trustworthiness, but it's deeper than that. It's the willingness to protect what's been entrusted to you, even when no one is watching, even when it's difficult. This woman understands amana better than most people with business degrees." Omar felt a familiar tightness in his chest, but this time it wasn't defensiveness. It was recognition. When Rebecca had betrayed him, he'd lost more than money. He'd lost faith in his ability to recognize trustworthy people. Yet Grace had just demonstrated the very quality he'd been searching for without knowing how to identify it. "Grace," Omar said slowly, May I ask you something personal? She nodded, though her expression showed slight wariness. The photograph on my desk, you mentioned noticing it. What else do you observe in my office that I might not realize I'm revealing? Grace hesitated, clearly uncomfortable with the personal nature of the question. Mr. Hassan, I don't want to overstep. Please, Omar interrupted. I'm asking because I think I need to understand how I appear to others. Your perspective has already shown me things about myself that I hadn't recognized. Taking a deep breath, Grace spoke carefully. Your office tells the story of someone who's achieved a lot but isn't celebrating any of it. You have awards, but they're positioned where visitors can see them, not where you would look at them. You keep that photograph hidden, which suggests you're protecting something precious but painful, and she paused, looking directly at him. You have fresh flowers delivered every Friday, but you never seem to notice them. It's like you're going through the motions of having a beautiful life without actually experiencing it. The accuracy of her observations was startling. Omar did have flowers delivered weekly, a service his assistant had arranged months ago, that he'd forgotten to cancel. He couldn't remember the last time he'd actually looked at them. Khalil leaned back in his chair, impressed. Grace, you're describing a man who's built walls not just around his heart, but around his ability to enjoy his own success. Is that what you see? I see someone who's afraid that if he enjoys good things, they'll be taken away, Grace replied, gently. But here's what I've learned from cleaning up after other people's mistakes. Protecting yourself from loss also protects you from gain. You can't selectively numb yourself. If you shut out the bad, you shut out the good too. Omar felt something shift inside him, not breaking but loosening. This woman had seen through years of carefully constructed defenses with the clarity of someone who genuinely cared about understanding rather than judging. There's something else, Grace continued, her voice softer now. In your office, you have books in Arabic that look like they've never been opened. Beautiful books with golden Arabic calligraphy. They're positioned like decoration, but I think they represent something important you've lost touch with. Omar's breath caught. Those books had been gifts from his father, containing poetry and stories from their Lebanese heritage. He'd displayed them prominently when he first moved into the office, intending to read them during quiet moments. But quiet moments had become rare, and the books had gradually become invisible to him. Rashid turned from the window, his expression thoughtful. Omar, do you know what your father would say if he could see you now? The question hit Omar like a physical blow. His father, Mahmoud Hassan, had immigrated to America with nothing but determination and an unshakable belief in treating every person with dignity. He'd built a successful import business, not through cutthroat tactics, but through honest relationships and genuine care for his employees and customers. He would say, I've forgotten who I am, Omar admitted quietly. And who are you? Grace asked, her tone free of judgment but full of genuine curiosity. Omar struggled to answer. 2 years ago, he would have said he was someone who believed in fairness, who valued relationships, who wanted to build something meaningful that honored his family's values. Now, he wasn't sure what he'd become beyond successful and alone. I used to be someone who cared more about doing the right thing than protecting myself, he said finally. Someone who believed that business could be both profitable and principled. Faisal nodded approvingly. That person still exists, Omar. But he's hidden behind walls that were built to protect him from one bad experience. The question is, are you ready to remember who you were before the walls went up? Grace stood slowly, glancing at the clock. Gentlemen, I don't want to interrupt your business further, but I do need to finish my work tonight. My daughter expects my call, and she worries if I'm late. Of course, Rashid said immediately. But before you go, I have a proposition for all of us. He looked around the room, his expression serious. Omar, my partners and I came here tonight to evaluate whether we could trust you with our investment. What we've discovered is that the question isn't whether you're trustworthy, it's whether you're ready to trust yourself again. And Grace, he turned to her, you've shown us something invaluable tonight. You've demonstrated that wisdom doesn't require wealth and that true leadership comes from understanding people, not just managing them. Khalil stood as well. We propose something unconventional. Omar, we'll invest in your expansion, but with conditions. You spend the next month learning from Grace, not about cleaning, but about seeing people the way she sees them, about rebuilding trust, about reconnecting with your values, about remembering why you started this business. Omar looked at Grace, who appeared as surprised as he felt. What do you think? He asked her. Would you be willing to help me remember who I used to be? Grace studied his face, seeing past the executive facade to the vulnerable person underneath. Mr. Hassan, I'm not a business consultant or a life coach. I'm just someone who pays attention to people. That's exactly why I need your help, Omar replied. I've forgotten how to pay attention to anything except profit margins. The deeper investigation had revealed truths none of them had expected to confront, setting the stage for a transformation that would challenge every assumption about mentorship, success, and the unexpected places where wisdom can be found. 3 weeks into their unconventional arrangement, Omar Hassan found himself experiencing New York City in ways he'd never imagined. Each morning at 6 a.m., instead of arriving at his office via private car service, he met Grace at the subway station near her Queens apartment. Their daily journey into Manhattan had become an education in perspectives he'd never considered. Today marked the most crucial test of their unusual mentorship. Grace had arranged for Omar to spend an entire day working alongside the cleaning crew at Harrison Financial Tower, not as an observer, but as a participant. The irony wasn't lost on him. The CEO learning about leadership by cleaning the building. He owned. You ready for this? Grace asked as they descended into the subway station at 5:30 a.m. She carried 2 thermoses of coffee and wore her usual cleaning uniform, while Omar had traded his $1,000 suits for simple work clothes that felt foreign against his skin. I'm not sure anyone can be ready for this, Omar replied, accepting the coffee gratefully. The past 3 weeks had been a revelation. Grace had introduced him to people whose names he'd never learned, despite seeing them daily. Security guards, maintenance workers, food service employees, delivery drivers. Each person had stories, dreams, struggles, and insights that challenged his narrow view of success. Miguel Santos, the cleaning crew supervisor, had initially been skeptical of Omar's presence. A wealthy executive wanting to play janitor for a day seemed like corporate tourism at best, exploitation at worst. But Grace had vouched for Omar's sincerity, and Miguel had agreed to treat him like any new employee. Listen, Mr. Hassan, Miguel had said during their first meeting, I don't care how much money you make or what degrees you have. Down here you follow my rules, you work at my pace, and you treat every surface like it belongs to your grandmother. Can you handle that? Omar had nodded, but understanding the words and living them proved to be entirely different challenges. The day began in the building's basement, where the cleaning crew gathered for their morning briefing. Omar found himself in a windowless room, filled with industrial equipment, surrounded by 12 people whose combined income barely equaled his monthly salary. Yet as Miguel outlined the day's assignments, Omar observed something he'd missed in countless corporate meetings: genuine teamwork. Rodriguez, you're on floors 15 through 20 today, Miguel announced. Take the new guy with you. Show him how we do things here. Carlos Rodriguez, a soft-spoken man in his 50s, nodded toward Omar. Have you ever operated a floor buffer before? No, Omar admitted. Then today you learn these machines don't care about your bank account. They'll knock you down just as fast as anyone else if you don't respect them. For the next 4 hours, Omar learned the physical demands of work he'd taken for granted his entire career. Operating industrial cleaning equipment required skill, strength, and precision. His back ached from bending over vacuum cleaners. His hands developed blisters from gripping buffer handles, and his respect for the people who did this work daily grew exponentially. But the real education came during lunch break. The cleaning crew gathered in a small break room in the building's sub-basement, a space Omar had never known existed. The conversation flowed between English and Spanish, occasionally including Portuguese and Arabic, as workers shared stories from their homelands. Omar listened, fascinated, as these invisible people revealed themselves to be former teachers, engineers, small business owners, and students, people whose circumstances had led them to cleaning work, but whose dreams extended far beyond. Mop buckets and vacuum cleaners. Maria Gonzalez, who cleaned the executive floors, was studying for her nursing degree at night. "I save every extra dollar for textbooks," she explained to Omar. "My dream is to work in pediatric care, to help children like my son who has special needs." Ahmed Al-Farouk, a Syrian refugee who cleaned the lower floors, spoke quietly about the engineering firm he'd owned in Damascus before the war forced him to flee. "Here, I start over from zero," he said without bitterness. "But I'm grateful for the work. It feeds my family while I study for American engineering certification." Each story hit Omar like a revelation. These weren't just cleaning staff. They were human beings with complex histories, current struggles, and future aspirations. His father's voice echoed in his memory. "Omar, the measure of a man isn't how much he earns, but how much he understands about the people around him." The afternoon brought Omar's greatest challenge yet. A water pipe had burst on the 35th floor, flooding 3 offices with several inches of standing water. The cleanup required immediate attention to prevent damage to expensive equipment. "And sensitive documents. This is where we see what you're made of," Grace said, as they surveyed the flooded offices. "This isn't scheduled cleaning, this is crisis management. No scripts, no procedures manual, just problem-solving and hard work." For the next 6 hours, Omar worked alongside the crew using industrial wet vacuums, dehumidifiers, and emergency fans. His expensive watch, a gift to himself after his first $1 million deal, was ruined by the dirty water. His designer shoes were destroyed. His manicured hands became rough and stained. But something remarkable happened during those exhausting hours. Omar found himself naturally falling into leadership patterns that had nothing to do with his corporate authority. When Maria struggled with a heavy vacuum, he stepped in to help without being asked. When Ahmed needed someone to hold equipment steady, Omar was there. When Carlos required assistance moving damaged furniture, Omar lifted and carried without complaint. "You're getting it," Grace observed during a brief break. "You're leading by serving, not commanding." The crisis deepened when building management arrived, panicked about potential damage to expensive law firm offices. Harold Brennan, the building's property manager, was someone Omar had dealt with professionally for years. But tonight, Brennan didn't recognize the man in soaked work clothes and safety goggles. "This cleanup needs to be perfect," Brennan announced to Miguel. "These law firms are major tenants. Any damage claims will come out of the cleaning company's contract." Omar watched Miguel's jaw tighten. The crew had been working for hours, doing everything possible to minimize damage, yet Brennan's tone suggested they were incompetent. This was Omar's defining moment. He could reveal his identity, use his authority to defend the crew, and resolve the situation through corporate power. Or he could trust what Grace had taught him about authentic leadership. Omar stepped forward, his voice calm but firm. "Sir, this crew has been working non-stop since the pipe burst. They've saved thousands of dollars in potential damage through quick action and expertise. Instead of criticism, they deserve recognition. Brennan looked at this dirty, exhausted worker with surprise. And you are? Someone who's learned that real leadership means standing up for people who do excellent work, especially when they can't defend themselves, Omar replied. Miguel watched this exchange with growing respect. Grace smiled quietly from across the room. The crew members exchanged glances, recognizing something special in Omar's willingness to speak up for them. Brennan, perhaps shamed by the rebuke from someone he assumed was just another janitor, backed down. Well, yes, I'm sure everyone is doing their best. After Brennan left, Miguel approached Omar. You didn't have to do that. Could have cost you your job speaking to management like that. Some things are worth the risk, Omar replied, understanding for the first time what Grace had meant about choosing principles over protection. As the crew finished their work near midnight, Omar realized he'd passed a test he hadn't even known. He was taking. For the first time in 2 years, he'd acted not from fear or defensiveness, but from courage and genuine care for others. The defining test had revealed who Omar Hassan could become when he remembered who he'd once been, not just a successful executive, but a man worth trusting, worth following, and worth believing in. But the greatest challenges still lay ahead. The morning after the water pipe crisis, Omar arrived at his office to find an unexpected scene. Word had spread throughout Harrison Financial Tower about the maintenance worker who had stood up to Harold Brennan and defended the cleaning crew. Several employees were discussing the incident with admiration, completely unaware that their CEO had been the anonymous hero. But Omar's transformation was about to face its most difficult test yet. Grace knocked on his office door at exactly 8 a.m., as had become their custom. However, today, she wasn't alone. Behind her stood Patricia Washington, Grace's daughter, whose presence immediately filled the room with tension that Omar couldn't understand. "Mr. Hassan," Grace said, her voice unusually formal, "I'd like you to meet my daughter Patricia. She insisted on coming here today." Patricia was a striking young woman in her mid-20s, her natural hair styled in an elegant afro, wearing a crisp business suit that suggested professional success. But her expression was anything but friendly as she looked at Omar. "So you're the executive who's been playing dress-up with my mother," Patricia said, her voice sharp with barely contained anger. Omar was taken aback by her hostility. "I'm sorry. I don't understand." "Don't you?" Patricia interrupted. "For a month, you've had my mother teaching you how to be human. Do you have any idea what she's sacrificed to accommodate your little social experiment?" Grace placed a gentle hand on her daughter's arm. "Patricia, please." "No, Mama. He needs to hear this." Patricia turned back to Omar, her eyes blazing. "While you've been learning valuable life lessons about treating people with dignity, my mother has been working double shifts to make up for the time she's spent on your personal development project. She's been taking on weekend hospital shifts, covering for other cleaners, and lying to me about how exhausted she is." Omar felt his stomach drop. In his focus on his own transformation, he hadn't considered the practical impact on Grace's life. "Grace, why didn't you tell me?" "Because that's who she is," Patricia answered before Grace could respond. "She sees the good in people and tries to help them, even when it costs her everything. But I'm here to ask you a question, Mr. Hassan. What exactly has she gotten out of this arrangement besides more work and less sleep?" The question hung in the air like an accusation. Omar realized with growing shame that he'd been so focused on his own growth that he'd treated Grace's wisdom like a free resource rather than recognizing the personal cost of her generosity. "Patricia," Grace said quietly, "Mr. Hassan has been They're paying me for the extra time, consultant fees that are probably less than he spends on lunch. Patricia shot back. Mama, you're worth more than whatever token payment he's offered. Omar felt the familiar walls beginning to rise in his chest, the defensive mechanisms that had protected him for 2 years starting to engage. This felt like another betrayal, another situation where his trust and goodwill were being questioned. But then he looked at Grace's face and saw something that stopped his defensiveness cold: embarrassment and pain. Patricia, that's enough, Grace said firmly. This isn't about money. It's always about money, Mama, don't you see? This man has learned to see you as human, but he's still treating you like his employee. You're teaching him lessons that Harvard Business School couldn't, and he's paying you cleaning wages for consultant-level work. The truth of Patricia's words hit Omar like a physical blow. He'd been so proud of his transformation, so focused on how much he'd learned and grown, that he'd failed to recognize the inequality that still defined their relationship. Grace had been carrying the burden of his education, while he reaped the benefits. You're right, Omar said quietly, his voice barely audible. Both women looked at him in surprise. You're absolutely right, he repeated louder this time. I've been selfish. I've been taking from your mother without understanding what I was asking her to give up. Patricia's anger faltered slightly, replaced by cautious surprise. She'd expected defensiveness or excuses, not immediate acknowledgement. Omar walked to his desk and opened a locked drawer, removing a folder he'd been preparing. I need to show you both something I was planning to reveal later, but perhaps now is the right time. He handed the folder to Grace, who opened it with trembling fingers. Inside were legal documents, financial statements, and official correspondence that she struggled to understand. What is this? Grace asked. It's the paperwork for the Grace Washington Educational Foundation, Omar explained. A scholarship fund I've established for working adults who want to pursue higher education while supporting their families. The initial endowment is $5 million. Grace's eyes widened. Mr. Hassan, I don't understand. The foundation will provide full scholarships, living stipends, and childcare support for people like Ahmed, who's studying for his engineering certification, and Maria, who's working toward her nursing degree. People like you, who have wisdom and intelligence but have never had the opportunity to pursue formal education. Patricia stared at the documents, her anger beginning to transform into confusion and then amazement. But there's more, Omar continued. Grace, I'm offering you the position of executive director of the foundation. Full salary, benefits, and the resources to help people whose stories you understand better than anyone else could. Grace sank into a chair, overwhelmed. I don't have the qualifications to run a foundation. You have the most important qualification, Omar replied. You understand what it means to have potential that's never been recognized, dreams that have been deferred, and wisdom that's been overlooked because it doesn't come with a diploma. Patricia looked between her mother and Omar, trying to process this unexpected turn of events. This is real. It's real, Omar confirmed. Your mother taught me that leadership isn't about commanding people. It's about creating opportunities for them to succeed. This foundation is my attempt to do for others what she did for me. See potential where others see only circumstances. Grace wiped tears from her eyes. But why? Why would you do this? Omar sat down across from her, his expression earnest. Because a month ago, I was successful but empty. I had money but no meaning. Achievement but no fulfillment. You showed me that real success isn't measured by what you accumulate, but by what you contribute. This foundation isn't charity, Grace. It's an investment in the kind of leadership and wisdom that you've demonstrated every day of your life. He turned to Patricia. And you're right to protect your mother. She deserves better than token payments for invaluable guidance, but I hope this foundation shows that I've learned something about recognizing worth and acting on it. Patricia's hostility had completely dissolved, replaced by something approaching awe. You're serious about this? You're really going to trust my mother with $5 million? I'm trusting her with something more valuable than money, Omar replied. I'm trusting her with the opportunity to change lives the way she changed mine. Grace stood slowly, still processing the magnitude of what Omar was offering. This foundation, would it help people like Ahmed get their certifications? Like Maria finished nursing school? People like them and people like you, Omar confirmed. Adults who've been told they're too old, too poor, or too uneducated to pursue their dreams. You'll identify candidates, design programs, and prove that wisdom comes in many forms. The revelation had transformed the conversation completely. What began as a confrontation about exploitation had become an opportunity for empowerment that none of them had anticipated. But the most profound revelation was yet to come. The realization that sometimes the greatest gift you can give someone is not just seeing their worth, but creating a platform for them to demonstrate that worth to the world. Grace looked at the foundation documents again, then at her daughter, then at Omar. If I accept this position, what happens to us? To this mentorship we've built? Omar smiled. It evolves. You become my partner in creating change instead of just my teacher about change. And maybe, he paused, looking at both women, we all discover that the best relationships aren't based on what one person can do for another, but on what people can accomplish together. The revelation was complete, but the transformation it would inspire was just beginning. 6 months after that transformative night in Conference Room 4201, the 42nd floor of Harrison Financial Tower bore witness to an extraordinary scene. The same boardroom that had once hosted tense negotiations between Omar Hassan and Middle Eastern investors now buzzed with energy from an entirely different kind of meeting. Around the polished oak table sat an unlikely assembly. Grace Washington, now impeccably dressed in a Navy business suit as executive director of the Grace Washington Educational Foundation. Patricia Washington, who had taken a leave of absence from her graduate program to serve as the foundation's program coordinator. Ahmed Al-Farouk, whose engineering certification had been completed through the foundation's first pilot program. Maria Gonzalez, now enrolled in an accelerated nursing program, and Miguel Santos, who was studying business management while continuing to lead the cleaning crew. At the head of the table sat Omar Hassan, but he was a different man than the isolated executive who had once occupied this space. The walls he'd built around his heart had been replaced by windows that let in light and possibility. His relationship with success had fundamentally changed. He no longer measured his worth by what he could accumulate, but by what he could enable others to achieve. The foundation has received over 3,000 applications in our first 6 months, Grace reported, her voice confident and professional. We've awarded full scholarships to 47 individuals across 15 different fields of study. Rashid Al-Mahmoud, who had flown in from Qatar specifically for this meeting, nodded approvingly. These numbers exceed our most optimistic projections. But tell us about the human impact, Grace. Statistics are important, but stories matter more. Grace smiled, consulting her notes. Ahmed completed his structural engineering certification and has been hired by Morrison & Associates as a junior engineer. His first project is designing affordable housing for refugee families, work that combines his professional skills with his personal passion. Ahmed spoke up, his English much improved after months in the Foundation's language enhancement program. This opportunity changed everything for my family. My daughter sees her father not as a man who cleans floors, but as an engineer who builds homes. The respect in her eyes, this is worth more than any salary. Maria added, I graduate from nursing school next month. The foundation covered not just tuition, but childcare for my son while I studied. Without that support, I would still be cleaning offices and dreaming about helping sick children instead of actually doing it. Patricia presented the next section of their report. We've also launched the Wisdom Exchange program, where foundation scholars mentor other applicants. Ahmed now tutors refugee engineers preparing for certification exams. Maria teaches basic healthcare skills to other immigrants. It's created a community of learners who support each other. Omar watched this presentation with pride that had nothing to do with personal achievement. 6 months ago, he would have measured success by profit margins and return on investment. Now he found himself moved to tears by stories of dreams realized and potential unleashed. Khalil Nassar leaned forward, intrigued. This mentorship model is innovative. Traditional scholarships provide funding, but your foundation seems to be creating something deeper, a network of mutual support. That was Grace's idea, Omar acknowledged. She understood that education isn't just about acquiring skills, it's about building confidence and community. People who've been overlooked by traditional systems need more than money. They need validation that their dreams are worth pursuing. Faisal al-Rashid consulted his own notes. The business metrics are equally impressive. Omar, your company's employee satisfaction scores have increased by 40% since the foundation launched. Productivity is up, turnover is down, and client satisfaction has reached all-time highs. How do you explain this correlation? Omar considered the question carefully. When leaders demonstrate that they value all people, not just those in positions of authority, it changes the entire culture of an organization. Our employees see that we're investing in cleaning staff and maintenance workers, and they understand that their own contributions are valued more highly as well. Miguel spoke for the first time during the meeting. I can explain it differently, he said, his accent thick, but his words precise. When Mr. Hassan worked alongside us during the flood cleanup, word spread through the building. People saw their CEO emptying water buckets and moving damaged furniture. They realized he understands their work, respects their effort. Now, when he asks for something, people don't just do it because they have to. They do it because they want to. Grace nodded. The foundation has become a symbol of possibility throughout the building. When Maria received her nursing school acceptance, it was announced in the employee newsletter. When Ahmed passed his engineering exam, Omar personally congratulated him in front of the entire executive team. Success became contagious. People started believing in their own potential. The presentation continued with financial reports, program evaluations, and expansion plans. But the real magic was in the transformed relationships around the table. 6 months ago, these people existed in completely separate worlds within the same building. Now they were partners in creating opportunities that none of them could have imagined alone. Rashid stood and walked to the windows overlooking Manhattan, his expression thoughtful. Omar, when we first met, we questioned whether you could be trusted with our investment because you seemed incapable of trusting others. What we witnessed today suggests that trust, once rebuilt, creates exponential returns. He turned back to the group. Our initial investment in your expansion has generated the returns we projected, but this foundation represents something more valuable, proof that business success and social impact can be mutually reinforcing rather than competing priorities. Omar stood as well, his voice filled with conviction. 6 months ago, I was successful but isolated. I had wealth but no purpose beyond accumulating more wealth. This foundation taught me that the most profitable investment is in human potential, because people who feel valued create value for others. Patricia, who had initially been skeptical of Omar's motives, now spoke with genuine admiration. What impresses me most is that this isn't charity, it's partnership. The foundation doesn't just give people opportunities, it creates platforms for them to demonstrate their capabilities and contribute their unique perspectives. Grace added, every scholar in our program brings something special to the community. Ahmed's engineering skills help other refugees navigate certification processes. Maria's healthcare knowledge helps families in our neighborhood access better medical care. Miguel's leadership experience helps other supervisors create more inclusive workplaces. The meeting concluded with plans for expansion, additional scholarships, new mentorship programs, partnerships with other companies interested in replicating the model. But the most significant resolution wasn't in the strategic plans. It was in the transformation of relationships that had begun with an accidental encounter in conference room 4201. As the investors prepared to leave, Rashid approached Omar privately. You have become the partner we hope to find. Someone who understands that true leadership creates more leaders, not more followers. Khalil shook hands with Grace, his respect evident. Your wisdom has not only transformed Omar, it has created a model that other organizations should study and emulate. Faisal addressed the entire group. In our culture, we believe that Allah places people in each other's paths for reasons that become clear over time. The night Grace accidentally entered your meeting was no accident. It was destiny revealing itself through human courage and compassion. As the room emptied, Omar and Grace stood together by the windows, looking out at the city that had been the backdrop for their unlikely partnership. Do you ever wonder what would have happened if you hadn't knocked on that conference room door? Omar asked. Grace smiled. My grandmother used to say, the path you're supposed to walk will always find your feet. I think we both ended up exactly where we were meant to be. The resolution was in place, but the impact of their story was just beginning to ripple outward into a world hungry for examples of what becomes possible when people choose connection over isolation, partnership over power, and wisdom over wealth. 1 year after Grace Washington first accidentally entered conference room 4201, Harrison Financial Tower had become something unprecedented in Manhattan's corporate landscape. A building where janitors and executives shared the same cafeteria, where cleaning staff were invited to company meetings, and where success was measured not just in quarterly profits, but in lives transformed. The transformation extended far beyond the foundation's scholarship recipients. Other companies throughout New York had begun implementing similar programs, inspired by the documented success of Omar's unconventional approach to business leadership. Harvard Business School had contacted Grace about developing a case study on invisible wisdom in corporate leadership. The Wall Street Journal had featured their story on the front page with the headline, "The Cleaning Lady Who Cleaned Up Corporate Culture." But for Omar and Grace, the most meaningful changes were personal and profound. Omar stood in his office, no longer the sterile workspace of an isolated executive. The hidden photograph had been moved to a prominent position on his desk. A picture of himself and his father taken the day he'd graduated from business school. Surrounding it were new images: Grace receiving her honorary doctorate from Columbia University, Ahmed breaking ground on his first affordable housing project, Maria in her nursing graduation cap and gown, and Miguel addressing a conference on inclusive leadership practices. The Arabic books his father had given him were no longer decorative objects. Omar had spent months reading them, reconnecting with the cultural wisdom and family values that had once guided his life. He'd even begun teaching basic Arabic to some of the foundation scholars, sharing not just language but heritage and perspective. Grace entered his office carrying 2 cups of coffee, a morning ritual that had evolved from their subway commutes to a daily planning session. But today felt different. Grace's expression carried a mixture of excitement and nervousness that Omar had learned to recognize as the precursor to significant announcements. "The foundation board approved our proposal," Grace said, setting down the coffee and pulling out a thick folder. "We're expanding internationally. The pilot program in Ghana launches next month." Omar's eyes widened. "Ghana? Your home country?" Grace nodded, her voice filled with emotion. 20 programs in rural communities focused on women who want to start businesses but lack access to education or capital. Patricia will oversee the launch. She's been accepted to the Peace Corps specifically to manage this project. The circular nature of this development wasn't lost on either of them. Grace had come to America seeking opportunities that Ghana couldn't provide. Now her daughter would return to Ghana carrying opportunities that could transform an entire generation of women. "There's something else," Grace continued, her tone becoming more serious. "I've been invited to speak at the United Nations Economic Council about inclusive development models. They want to understand how businesses can create social impact without sacrificing profitability." Omar felt a surge of pride, but also a pang of loss. "You're leaving, aren't you?" Grace sat down across from him, her expression gentle but resolute. "Not leaving, expanding. The foundation needs to be bigger than what we've built here. There are Ahmeds and Marias in every city, every country. People with potential who've been overlooked because they don't have the right credentials or connections." She paused, looking around the office that had become as familiar to her as her own apartment. "But this will always be home base. This is where we learned that transformation is possible when people choose to see each other clearly." Omar walked to the windows overlooking the city, processing the magnitude of what Grace was proposing. A year ago, he would have seen her departure as another betrayal, another person leaving him behind. Now, he understood it as the natural evolution of a partnership that had always been about creating opportunities for others. "What about us?" he asked. "This partnership we've built?" Grace joined him at the window, both of them looking out at the Manhattan skyline that had witnessed their unlikely friendship. "Omar, the most successful partnerships are the ones that don't depend on proximity. We've created something that can exist anywhere people are willing to look beyond surfaces and see potential." She handed him a letter bearing the UN logo. "They've invited you to co-present with me the business case for human-centered leadership. Will you come?" Omar read the invitation, feeling the same mixture of excitement and terror he'd experienced the night he'd first met Grace. Speaking at the United Nations meant exposing their story to global scrutiny, making himself vulnerable to the same kind of judgment he'd spent years avoiding, but it also meant amplifying the message that had transformed his life. That wisdom comes from unexpected sources. That leadership means creating opportunities for others, and that success without connection is just expensive loneliness. "I'll come," he said finally, "but only if we present it as equal partners, not the executive and his consultant, but as collaborators who learned from each other." Grace smiled, the expression that had first captivated the Middle Eastern investors and countless others since. "That's exactly what we are." Their conversation was interrupted by a knock on the door. Patricia entered, followed by Ahmed, Maria, Miguel, and a dozen other foundation scholars. Their faces reflected excitement and anticipation. "Surprise," Patricia announced. "We organized a celebration for the foundation's first anniversary." What followed was unlike any corporate celebration Omar had ever experienced. Instead of champagne and catered hors d'oeuvres, they shared homemade food from each scholar's cultural background. Ahmed brought Lebanese kibbeh that reminded Omar of his grandmother's cooking. Maria contributed tamales that filled the office with the aroma of home. Miguel brought his wife's arroz con pollo, explaining that success meant nothing if you couldn't share it with family. As they ate and laughed together, Omar realized that this was what his father had meant about the importance of community. Success wasn't a solitary achievement. It was a shared experience that grew stronger when distributed among people who cared about each other's well-being. Grace stood to address the group, her voice carrying the authority she'd developed over months of managing the foundation. A year ago, I walked into Mr. Hassan's meeting by accident. I was just a cleaning lady trying to do her job. Today, we're a community of learners, teachers, and dreamers who've discovered that transformation is contagious. She looked around the room, making eye contact with each person. Ahmed, you're not just an engineer, you're proving that refugees can become community builders. Maria, you're not just studying nursing, you're showing other mothers that education and family can coexist. Miguel, you're not just managing a cleaning crew, you're demonstrating that leadership comes from serving others. Turning to Omar, she continued, and Mr. Hassan has shown us that executives can be partners rather than bosses, that wealth can create opportunities rather than just accumulate privileges. Omar felt compelled to respond. Grace, you taught me the most important lesson of my life, that seeing people clearly isn't just morally right, it's practically effective. Every person in this room has made our organization stronger, more innovative and more successful because we learned to recognize and develop their potential. The celebration continued for hours, but the real significance wasn't in the food or conversation. It was in the relationships that had formed, bonds that transcended economic status, educational background, and cultural differences. They had become a chosen family, united by shared values and mutual respect. As the evening wound down and people began to leave, Grace and Omar found themselves alone in the office once more. The transformation was complete, but they both understood that completion was really a new beginning. "Are you ready for what comes next?" Grace asked. Omar looked around his office, filled with evidence of lives changed and dreams realized. "I'm ready for whatever comes next, as long as we face it together." The final message was clear. Transformation isn't a destination. It's a way of traveling through life, with eyes open to possibility, hearts ready for connection, and hands extended to lift others up. Sometimes the most profound changes begin with the simplest human gesture, truly seeing the person standing right in front of you. 5 years have passed since Grace Washington accidentally walked into conference room 4201, and the ripple effects of that single moment continue to expand across continents. What began as an unplanned encounter between a cleaning lady and an executive has evolved into a global movement that challenges how we think about leadership, potential, and the value of every human being. Standing before the United Nations General Assembly, Grace Washington commands attention not through authority, but through authenticity. Her journey from invisible night shift worker to internationally recognized advocate for inclusive development has become a symbol of what's possible when society chooses to see clearly. 5 years ago, Grace tells the Assembly of World Leaders, "I was a woman whose voice was rarely heard and whose wisdom was never sought. I cleaned the offices of powerful people who made decisions affecting millions of lives, yet my insights were considered worthless because I lacked formal credentials." She pauses, her eyes scanning the faces of presidents, prime ministers, and policymakers. "Today, I stand before you not because I've changed, but because someone chose to see me differently. The question I pose to every leader in this room is simple. How many voices in your organizations, your communities, your countries are going unheard because you haven't learned to listen beyond positions and titles?" Beside her, Omar Hassan nods. his own transformation evident in his posture and presence. The defensive isolation that once defined him has been replaced by confident vulnerability, the mark of a leader who has learned that strength comes from connection, not control. The Grace Washington Educational Foundation has now awarded over 2,500 scholarships across 43 countries, Omar reports to the Assembly. But the numbers tell only part of the story. What we've really created is proof that human potential exists everywhere, waiting to be recognized and developed. He clicks to the next slide of their presentation, showing a map dotted with lights representing foundation programs worldwide. In rural Ghana, women who were told they were too old to learn are now running successful businesses and teaching financial literacy to their communities. In refugee camps in Jordan, former professionals are using foundation support to rebuild their careers while helping other displaced families navigate new systems. The presentation continues with stories that have become legendary in development circles. Imara Sise, a former street vendor in Sierra Leone, used a foundation scholarship to become a microfinance specialist who has helped thousands of women start businesses. Dr. Chen Wei, a Chinese immigrant who worked in restaurant kitchens while studying, is now a pediatric surgeon who provides free medical care to underserved communities. But perhaps the most powerful testimony comes from an unexpected source. Patricia Washington approaches the podium, her confidence earned through years of fieldwork in some of the world's most challenging environments. "I am the daughter of a cleaning lady," she begins, her voice clear and strong. "Growing up, I watched my mother work multiple jobs to support my education, never imagining that her own wisdom and experience had value beyond our small apartment in Queens." She looks directly at her mother, seated in the front row. The foundation changed our family's trajectory, but more importantly, it changed how we think about intelligence, education, and worth. My mother didn't need to be rescued from her circumstances. She needed to be recognized for the leader she already was. Patricia's presentation focuses on the Foundation's youth initiatives, programs designed to help children see potential in every adult around them, regardless of their job titles or economic status. We're teaching the next generation that wisdom comes from experience, not just formal education, that leadership can be demonstrated while mopping floors, serving food, or driving taxis. The impact extends beyond individual success stories. Major corporations have adopted the Harrison model of inclusive leadership, named after the building where Grace and Omar first met. Universities now offer courses on invisible leadership and non-traditional wisdom sources. The Foundation's mentorship matching system has been replicated in over 200 organizations worldwide. But the most profound changes are often the most personal. Omar's relationship with success has been fundamentally redefined. His investment firm, now renamed Hassan Washington Partners, has become the most sought-after company for socially conscious investors. Their returns remain strong, but their reputation is built on something more valuable: the demonstrated ability to identify and develop human potential that others overlook. "We measure success differently now," Omar explains to the UN Assembly. "Yes, we track profit margins and return on investment. But we also measure how many people we've helped transition from survival to thriving, how many communities we've strengthened, how many voices we've amplified that were previously silenced." The presentation concludes with a challenge that has become the Foundation's rallying cry. Grace returns to the podium for the final section. Every person in this room has Grace Washingtons in their organizations. People whose potential you haven't recognized because you're looking for qualifications instead of qualities. Custodians who understand facility management better than consultants. Administrative assistants who know more about organizational efficiency than executives. Security guards who have insights about safety and community that surpass expensive studies. She looks directly into the cameras broadcasting this session worldwide. The question isn't whether these people exist, they do. The question is whether you have the courage to see them, the wisdom to listen to them, and the commitment to create opportunities for them. Omar steps forward for the final appeal. 5 years ago, I was successful but empty, wealthy but isolated. I had everything money could buy, but nothing that money couldn't replace. The night Grace walked into my meeting, she didn't just change my business, she saved my life by reminding me what life is actually for. He pauses, his voice filled with emotion. We're not asking you to give charity. We're inviting you to make investments in human beings whose returns will exceed anything the stock market can offer. We're asking you to build bridges instead of walls, to create opportunities instead of obstacles, to choose connection over isolation. The presentation ends with a simple but powerful call to action. Look around your workplace tomorrow. Really look. See the people who keep your organization running, but whose names you don't know. Learn their stories, understand their dreams, recognize their potential. Then ask yourself, what would happen if we created opportunities for them? To use all of their capabilities, not just the ones we currently need. As Grace and Omar leave the podium to thunderous applause, they carry with them the hope that their story will inspire others to write similar stories in their own communities and organizations. The foundation has established the First Look initiative, encouraging organizations to identify and develop overlooked talent within their existing workforce. They've created the Invisible Leaders Recognition Program, celebrating people who demonstrate exceptional character and wisdom regardless of their formal positions. But perhaps most importantly, they've proven that transformation is possible. At any stage of life, in any circumstance, when people choose to see each other clearly and act on what they see. Grace Washington, once invisible in the corridors of power, now influences policy at the highest levels of international development. Omar Hassan, once isolated by his success, now builds bridges that connect potential with opportunity across cultural and economic divides. Their story continues to unfold, but its central message remains constant. Every person you encounter has something valuable to offer. The question is, whether you're brave enough to look beyond surfaces and see the extraordinary potential that exists in ordinary people. The legacy they're building isn't measured in dollars or degrees, but in lives transformed, communities strengthened, and barriers broken down one relationship at a time. This is what happens when an accidental encounter becomes an intentional commitment to seeing and developing human potential wherever it exists. This is the power of choosing connection over isolation, partnership over hierarchy, and possibility over prejudice. The story of Grace and Omar proves that sometimes the most profound changes in our world begin with the simplest human choice, truly seeing the person standing right in front of you. The story you've just witnessed isn't fiction. It represents a reality happening in offices, schools, hospitals, and communities around the world right now. Somewhere in your city, there's Grace Washington cleaning buildings at midnight while dreaming of bigger contributions. Somewhere in your workplace, there's an Omar Hassan who has forgotten that success without connection is just expensive loneliness. The question isn't whether these people exist. The question is, what will you do with this knowledge? Take a moment to look in the mirror, not at your reflection, but at your life. How many Grace Washingtons pass through your daily routine without you truly seeing them? The security guard who greets you each morning, do you know their name? The person who delivers your mail, cleans your office, serves your coffee, what dreams might they be carrying that you've never thought to discover? We live in a world that has trained us to categorize people by their job titles, their income, levels, their educational credentials. But Grace and Omar's story reveals a profound truth. Human potential doesn't announce itself with degrees or designer clothes. It often whispers from the corners where society has placed people we've learned not to see. Maria Gonzalez, the nursing student who once cleaned executive offices, now saves children's lives in pediatric wards. Ahmed Al-Farouk, the Syrian refugee, who emptied trash cans, now designs affordable housing for displaced families. Miguel Santos, who supervised night shift cleaners, now teaches inclusive leadership at corporate conferences. Each of these transformations began with someone choosing to see potential where others saw only circumstances. The Grace Washington Educational Foundation didn't change the world by accident. It succeeded because people made intentional choices to look beyond surfaces and invest in human potential. But you don't need a $5 million foundation to create transformation. You need something much simpler and much more powerful, the willingness to see people clearly and act on what you discover. Consider Marcus Thompson, a warehouse supervisor in Detroit who watched this story and decided to implement his own version of Grace's wisdom. He started eating lunch with his team members, learning their stories, discovering their aspirations. He found that James, a forklift operator, had been an accountant in Nigeria before immigrating. Sarah, who worked the loading dock, was studying web design at night. Tony, who managed inventory, had innovative ideas about supply chain efficiency that no consultant had ever proposed. Marcus didn't have millions to invest, but he had something equally valuable: influence within his organization. He advocated for James to join the accounting department part-time while continuing warehouse work. He convinced management to fund Sarah's web design certification. He ensured Tony's efficiency proposals reached upper management with full credit. Within 2 years, Marcus's warehouse had the lowest turnover rate, highest productivity scores, and most innovative suggestions of any facility in the company. More importantly, 3 people had transformed their career trajectories because one supervisor chose to see them clearly. Grace and Omar's story doesn't end with their United Nations presentation or their foundation's global expansion. It continues. Every time someone chooses to see beyond surfaces, every time potential is recognized in unexpected places, every time walls are replaced with bridges. Their story continues in a hospital in Kenya, where a former street sweeper now manages medical supplies with innovations that save lives and reduce costs. It continues in a tech startup in São Paulo, founded by a woman who was told she was too old to learn programming. It continues in classrooms around the world, where teachers who once worked as janitors bring unique perspectives to education that university-trained educators never considered. But most importantly, their story continues with you. The person who cleans your office tonight might have solutions to problems your company has struggled with for years. The immigrant who serves your food might have entrepreneurial insights that could revolutionize your industry. The elderly security guard might have decades of leadership experience that your organization desperately needs. The question isn't whether these people exist in your world. They do. The question is whether you have the courage to see them, the wisdom to listen to them, and the commitment to create opportunities for them. Grace Washington walked into conference room 4201 by accident, but everything that followed was the result of intentional choices to see clearly and act boldly on what was discovered. Your moment to make those same choices begins now. The next Grace Washington is waiting for someone to see their potential. The next Omar Hassan is ready to remember what success actually means, that someone could be you will. You choose to see clearly? The world is waiting for your answer. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hits the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.